Welcome to EPG Pathshala Architecture lecture series for MArch students. So, today's urban fabric is the module, urban design studio is the module, and the paper is reading the urban fabric part 2. So, what are the main objectives in reading the urban fabric part 2? First is we are going to analyze what is urban fabric, what are the different ways of reading urban fabric, what are the ways of interpreting urban fabric, and how do we understand urban fabric. Identifying urban fabric. What is the need to actually identify urban fabric? Now we have, in the last classes, we have actually looked into what are the different types of urban fabrics, what are the different, how the cities have changed over a period of time, and when they have changed, how the urban fabric has changed over a period of time. So now in today's session, we will actually look into why do we actually need to identify urban fabric, what is it to essential to understand urban fabric. By understanding and by identifying urban fabric, it will help us to look into the influence of the urban character. So, when you have identified urban fabric, it will help us to understand what is the essential criteria which has influenced the urban character. Every city has its own character. So, reading an urban fabric, it will help us to know what has actually influenced the urban character of a city. And there are different types of actually identifying an urban fabric. Identifying an urban fabric, there are 4 major criteria to actually identify the urban fabric. One is the place. A place of a city, it has its own characteristics, and the other is the name. Every name has got its meaning. So, the meaning of that place will actually tell us about the city's origin. That is, it will tell us about the urban fabric of the city. The other one is every urban fabric has its own significance. The significance, it can be a political significance, it can be a religious significance, it can be a historical and also an architectural significance. And the other one is the origin. Origin is nothing but what is the foundation and what is the society. So, looking into the place, the name of the place, what is the significance that place holds, and what is the origin of the place. All these 4 criteria will help us in actually identifying the urban fabric of a town or a city. Now, when you look into a place, when you look into the place of urban fabric, there are different characteristics that the place will play in a major role in identifying the urban fabric. When you say a place, there are 3 major characteristics which come into place. The first thing is the topographical characteristics. The topography of the place has a lot to reveal about the city's urban fabric. Then after the topography, you have the geographical characteristics, the geography of the place, and next one is the environmental characteristics. So, these are the 3 main things that will actually help in revealing the identity of the urban fabric. Now, similarly, in very simple terms, when you say geography of the place, you can wonder how will geography tell about the urban fabric? How will geography actually tell you whether how the city is formed? What are the street pattern? What is the character of the urban blocks over there? Now, for example, when you take a desert, a town in a desert will be very, very different when you take a town or a city near a mountain area or a hilly area. So, that is the geography of the place. The geography of the place itself will depict the urban fabric of that town or a city. So, one important criteria in identifying the urban fabric is the place, and within the place, the geography of the place, the geography where the town or the city is located is very, very important. The second one, if you actually look into, is the topography and the environmental characteristics, the topography and the landscape characteristics. So, for this to actually highlight the identity of the urban fabric in terms of the place, I have taken the example of Eyüp, which is located in city of Istanbul, Turkey. So, this is also a very, very old city, but it has been progressed and it has gradually increased over a period of time. So, in the city of Istanbul, in Eyüp, what happens is the topography actually very well highlights the city urban fabric. Now in this map, if you actually look into the map, what you can see over here, you can see a series of contours. You have this gold horn which is actually a river, and then you find a plain land over here. This is the plain land. So these are all the contours, and the top is actually facing the north. So basically, to speak, towards the east side you have the golden horn which is actually a river, and then to the north and towards the west side you have undulating hills, and towards the south you have the land walls. So the topography actually shows that the core of the town is situated on a flat land, that is where the Eyüp Mosque was actually located. And then later it is actually surrounded by hills, and it is also surrounded by a water body. So this is actually basically explaining the topography and the landscape characteristics of this place, how the topography of the place has actually given rise to certain settlements over the period of time. These boundaries, which is basically the river towards one side, hills towards two sides, that is the northern side and the western side, and towards the south side you have the city walls. So these actually define the plane where actually a mosque is located, and all these topographical features basically give Eyüp a very linear form. So looking at the topographical and the landscape characteristics of a place, we get to know the form of the city, how the urban fabric has changed over a period of time, or it has taken that form because of the topographical characteristics. Then moving on, this is a very old picture of the same gold horn which we have seen earlier. It is in the 19th century. It actually acted as a recreational area, and many of the environmental and the landscape values, because of the water over here, this landscape actually was used for cultivation of many vegetables, fruits, flowers, and it resulted in numerous gardens. And there was also this commercial garden which is called as Bostan. If you look in the next page, this is a figure of Bostan, wherein because of the landscape characteristics of this city, it has given rise to a lot of urban greenery all around. And it also has given rise to the orientation of many of the buildings. Many of the buildings actually started to look onto the urban greenery because they wanted to have different views of the city. So this is how a city, based on its topographical and based on its landscape values, actually gives an identity to the urban fabric. Now looking next to the name of the city, how a name actually helps in identifying the urban fabric. Name of a place, like every name has a meaning to itself, even a place will also have a certain meaning to it, which actually helps in revealing what is the character of the city, what is the religious function of the city, what was the political function of the city. For example, if you take a place in Spain which is Santiago de Compostela, it was actually a place which had a very religious function, and because of this name, when you hear that other place, you get to know that the urban fabric is a very ancient urban fabric, as you have seen earlier in the case of Mesopotamia, where the center was very planned, and as you go away from the city, you have an organic form of the city. So getting to hear about the name, you get to know what type of function the city tends to serve, and based on that you will try to get an idea about the urban fabric of the place. So the name of the place basically tends to determine the principal function of the city, which is actually very deeply rooted in its urban form, and this also, the function of the city will also have an effect on the urban fabric. Next, the other way of actually identifying the urban fabric, till now we have seen about the place and the name. The other one is the significance. Every place has its own political significance, it will have a religious significance. Now when you look into a political significance, this is a picture of Eyüp, the mosque area. So when you look into this mosque, you can find actually a pathway which is leading to the mosque area. So this pathway was actually once used for all the the sultans who actually ruled the area, they actually had a parade type of, they used to actually approach the mosque in a parade. So this gave a lot of political significance. The area itself, the mosque and the street which is leading to the mosque, gave a very political significance to the urban fabric. So when you look into this picture, you get to know that yes, this Eyüp city had some sort of political significance, and it actually gives an identity to the urban fabric. Even this is another picture wherein there is a street, and this street is mainly composed of if you look into the street, it has a lot of Islamic and Turkish character. You see here you have a lot, there is a dome, you find some dome structures, and here you see a row of houses or a row of buildings. So this actually creates a sort of Turkish character to the place, and this actually creates a political significance. It highlights that the lands were actually once conquered, and then it was actually legitimized and it was given the Islamic recognition. So even the political significance of a place helps in identifying the urban fabric. Then looking into the religious significance, any place, any urban fabric area, you will find a lot of tombs, and you can also find certain graveyards. So these actually create a religious significance to the urban fabric. So Eyüp was actually a holy shrine. It was also a place for pilgrimage, and it was also a center for religious tourism, because there was many tombs, and even the graveyards also, they acted actually as a religious place for many people to visit the area. So the identity of an urban fabric also has its roots through its religious significance. So this is a picture which actually highlights the tombs in Eyüp. It is actually seen as an urban space wherein many people come and they look into the area over there. This actually shows how religiously it can signify the urban fabric. The tombs over there, and also this is a graveyard, but it is also, the graveyard is also treated as a religious place where people from many different parts come over there and pay their respects. So religious significance has a very important play in actually identifying the urban fabric. The next one which has an important role in identifying the urban fabric is the architectural significance. The architectural significance is in the form of, because Eyüp was a very old city and now we are looking into the history of that city, we will be looking into the minarets and the domes. So these minarets, domes and arches, they actually played a lot of architectural significance onto the urban fabric. So they give stress in highlighting, they actually highlight the relationship between the mass and the volume of the urban fabric through the monumental quality. So architectural significance plays an important role in identifying the urban fabric, especially by creating a relationship between the mass and the volume, thereby giving a monumental quality to the space. So basically architectural significance through domes and through minarets highlights the identity of the urban fabric. The next one is the origin. Origin, as in sense, when you think about origin, the first thing that comes into your mind is the foundation, and the other one is the society. So when you look into the foundation of a urban fabric, where was the center of the city, it gives you a starting point actually to start the study of urban fabric, to identify the urban fabric. So knowing the foundation of the city will give you a clue as to how the urban fabric has started and evolved over a period of time. Then when you look into the origin, and the second important thing is the society. When you go to the society over there, you will get an urbanization experience, and you will tend to identify how the urban system of a particular culture, the system of that culture has evolved over a time and has actually led to the growth of the city. So the main points in identifying the urban fabric is origin, and within origin it is mainly the foundation and the society. So the four main important points which help in identifying the urban fabric of a place are the place as itself, looking into the geographical characteristics and the topographic characteristics. Then the name of the place, every name will have a lot of recognition, will have a lot of significance for itself. The next one is the political, religious and the architectural significances which the place actually has, and the origin. The origin, all these 4 characteristics will have a key role in identifying the urban fabric. Now, having identified the urban fabric, we will go ahead and see as to what are the ways of reading urban fabric. So, you have an urban fabric with you, you have identified the urban fabric. So, now we will just go through as to how you need to actually read the map. Urban fabric over here is how you read the figure ground map, how you read the black and white map, how you read the solid and void map, which we have already dealt in the previous class. So, now looking into reading the urban fabric, there are actually 4 to 5 main methods of reading the urban fabric. But before we go to the methods of reading the urban fabric, it is necessary to understand what is the need and what is the base for reading the urban fabric. So, by reading the urban fabric, identifying the urban fabric will help us to read the urban fabric. But then why do you want to actually read the urban fabric? The need to read the urban fabric is to create a continuity, to create an identity, to create a continuity and to create creativity for the future city form. You read the urban fabric to identify what is there, then to continue and to actually create a future growth for the city. So, that is the need for actually reading an urban fabric, to have an identity, to have a continuity and to actually go for a creativity of the future city. There is a need to read. Now, we will look into what are the different ways of reading the urban fabric. So, first one is very importantly, what is the growth process? When you find the map, when you say urban fabric map, it is nothing but the figure ground map. So, when you look into the figure ground map, you have to look into how is the growth of the city. Is it a linear growth or is it an organic growth? This will actually help us in understanding a lot of characteristics which I have identified earlier in the previous session. The next one is looking into the architectural elements. Architectural elements here refer to the built structures, they refer to the unbuilt structures and they refer to the combining elements, that is a combination of both the built and the unbuilt. So, when you read these architectural elements, it tells us a lot about the urban fabric. Then apart from reading the urban fabric from the growth process perspective and from the architectural element perspective, there are other 3 different ways of reading the urban fabric. The first one is identifying the routes. What are the routes that connect the city with the major regional poles? So, there is a need to actually identify the routes that basically connect the city to actually read the urban fabric. The second one is identifying the natural base of the site, and the next one is identifying what are the existing layouts that will help in giving a clue of the geometrical shapes that actually identify the urban fabric. So, these are the main 3 methods which also have sub methods within them to actually read the urban fabric, so that you can create the future growth of the city. So, now we will look into reading the urban fabric from a growth process perspective. Understanding the growth process basically helps us to understand how the city has developed and it has changed over a period of time. So, this is a timeline of basically a city map of Johannesburg and also of Watsonville. So, here in the map you can see from 1889 how the city has changed over the period of time from 1889 to 1897 and then to 1901 to 1905. So, if you just without looking much, if you just look into the fabric of the city itself, though it is not a black and white map, but still you can understand how in 1889 how this place was vacant and then how it has changed over a period of time, and again from 1897 to 1905 how these spaces have changed. So, the growth process of the urban fabric actually shows how the city has changed over a period of time and what was the reason for the changing of the period of time. Now, actually if you look into the previous slide, the center is actually Johannesburg, the center of the city is actually Johannesburg, and the suburban areas which are onto the peripheral of the city is actually Roosterville. So, what happened was in Johannesburg was actually it started with the discovery of a lot of gold and mining activities, and eventually when people got to know, people migrated from other areas and they started moving into the city, and the belt that was actually underneath stood out actually as a buffer zone between the white people and the other people who started migrating to the city. When you look into the urban growth process of the urban fabric, you will get to understand how the city has grown over a period of time. So, Roosterville was established as a suburb in the south of Johannesburg inner city, and mostly it was inhabited by many migrants. And though not many changes actually took in the layout of the city, there were a lot of subdivisions in the plots. Now, we will go on into architectural elements. So, architectural elements basically they help us to understand what is the logic under the articulation of spaces, what is the logic under the articulation of different elements by looking into the relationship between the built areas and the remaining open spaces. So, as we have addressed earlier, architectural elements are basically about the solids, that is the built structures, the voids which are the spatial structures, and the combining or the articulating elements. So, now in detail we will be looking at the architectural elements and how they help us in reading the urban fabric. So, architectural elements they help us to basically understand what is the logic underlying the articulation of different elements. When I say different elements, it is nothing but the spatial elements, that is the built structures, the unbuilt structures, and the combination of both of this, that is the articulation of the spatial structures and the unbuilt structures. What is the relationship between underlying relationship between looking at both the built up areas and the remaining open spaces. So, architectural elements will actually help us to understand the urban fabric from looking into the logic behind the allocation of spaces for these built space and for the unbuilt spaces. So, when you say architectural elements refer to the built structures, and then we have the voids are nothing but the unbuilt structures, and then the articulating elements. Now, a built structure basically looks at the solids. When you see a city as in such, a built structure does not make up of only a one block, but they are a composition of different blocks within the city. So, these blocks are actually a planned cluster of buildings. It can be a residential neighborhood or it can be also a market area. So, these built structures, the market area and the unbuilt structure or the street beside it will have a type of significance which helps us in reading the urban fabric. The width of the street, which is actually which acts as a frontage to the market area, will have a reading of urban fabric. It has a story to tell, it has something to tell about the urban fabric. Similarly, a residential neighborhood which is located in a certain pattern or which is located in a certain area of the city has something to inform about the urban fabric of that area. Similarly, a planned cluster, why was it planned? If it is a cluster, why is it planned? Why wouldn't it be an unplanned cluster? So, everything has some sort of information to reveal about the urban fabric. So, that is what we look into the architectural elements and especially the spatial structures, that is the residential neighborhood, it can be the commercial buildings, it can be a market area or it can be just a simple green open space also. All these have something to reveal about the urban fabric, and so it is actually necessary for us to read the urban fabric in terms of the composition of the solid built up structures. So, when you say about the built up structures, the status, The status as in such, you have the private houses and you also have official buildings. When you say buildings, within the buildings itself there are a criteria or a category of buildings that fall. And then when you look into the function of the buildings, there are different functions each building holds. A house has a different function, a residential area itself in whole has a different function. Official building, which it has a religious function, it can have a social function, and also the commercial buildings also have different functions. So each of these buildings, though it is not only seen as a building block as in such also has different functions and it has a different status to reveal about the urban fabric of the place. So spatial structures, when you look into the spatial structures reveal more into the streets, the courtyards, the gardens and the vegetable areas around the city. When you say an architectural element is trying to reveal something about the urban fabric, you have to look in terms of its spatial characteristics also, apart from the built characteristics. The spatial characteristics, basically within a city, it is mainly made up of the streets, the courtyards, the gardens and also the vegetable gardens for commercial purposes. Gardens differ from a private open space which is very privately owned to a vegetable garden which is actually used for a commercial purpose. So all these areas or all these structures have different ways to contribute to the city fabric. But mainly within an urban fabric, when you say it is a spatial structure, the main thing that comes to one's mind is basically the streets and the squares or the center of the city, the center public spaces which is used for some sort of public gatherings. So in the next few slides we will actually look into how these different spatial characteristics have got to define the urban fabric of the space. So in the next few slides we will be going through the streets and the other characteristics of how to actually read the urban fabric by identifying the natural base of the site, by identifying the natural topography of the site. And the next few slides will be actually about interpreting the urban fabric. How do you actually interpret the urban fabric? By going for mental maps and by going for public images. So we will again go through this, we will have a small brief in the next session and go to these other undealt parts. Thank you.